I think the hardest thing in healthcare innovation is the adoption phase.
You built a $1 billion company while raising 10 kids. What do you know about time management that the rest of the world doesn't know?
What you want to do is get a job with somebody who knows a lot about a career or an industry that you can learn from. Don't worry about your title. Don't worry about the money. You're going to have a better career if you're in a position to learn.
The average CEO tenure in America is 7 years. You've been CEO of Omnicell for 33 years. If you were to pass the baton to your son, what would that conversation look like?
Wow, that's a good question. I think it sounds obvious, but think long term. Long term isn't 5 years, it's 10, 20, 30. So that when you stand up in 30 years, you could say, hey, not always perfect, but we lived up to what we committed to. I love, this is a very insightful question. I'll give you a 10 out of 10 for asking this question.
My guest today has revolutionized the way hospitals and pharmacies operate. Someone who took a deeply personal experience and turned it into a global mission to make healthcare safer, smarter, and more efficient. Randy Lipps, the founder, chairman, and CEO of Omnicell, saw firsthand how inefficiencies in medication management could impact patient care. And he didn't just talk about it, he built it. Fast forward to today, and Omnicell technology powers over 7,000 healthcare facilities worldwide, driving automation, reducing errors, and transforming how we think about medication safety. If you were ever wondering how cutting-edge tech is reshaping healthcare, or how one idea can scale into a $1 billion company, make sure you stick around, because today we're talking to Randy Lipps and his journey. Randy, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. What fun it is to talk about the stories and the journeys. And, healthcare is, it's a big blob out there for many of us. And so we can get a little clarity around some of the things that hopefully can change the world a little bit as we move forward.
Yes, and for the better. Better. So something I want to deep dive into. When I was doing my research for this, I found an interesting fact that I want to tell the people about from the top. So most people struggle to manage their time with 1 or 2 kids and a 9 to 5. You built a $1 billion company while raising 10 kids. What do you know about time management that the rest of the world doesn't know?
Well, the most important thing about raising 10 kids is to make sure whatever the youngest one is at the moment doesn't get killed. And then, the rest are on their own.
Well, I think you've done a good job so far.
Yeah.
No, and actually something else that I read, and you tell me if it's true or not. When your son Zachary was born, that's when you saw your first $1 million check. Is that true?
The number 6 child was in the hospital where we had our prototype. And just as he was born, we got our first VC funding for $1 million that allowed us to move out of the house.
So how did that feel? How did that feel? Was it what was? Because you had to go through a lot of emotions there. You just had a newborn child, and you just set a new peak in your company, new goal, new achievement. How was that feeling that day?
Well, it's a fascinating story if I can tell it. I mean, we were actually starting in the house. So we had 5 kids in the house. Kathy, my wife, was pregnant with number 6, Zachary. And we weren't supposed to be in the house. We were supposed to move out to a little R&D workspace, but we just didn't have time because we had our first customer who was willing to take the prototype. So we kept working away and taking more space out of the house to build the prototype. And we had 4 or 5 engineers from Stanford who were in graduate school or about to graduate, coming over, doing code, building one product. And so we just kept going, and they loved coming to the house because we didn't give them much money. What we did is we fed them. So we were feeding steaks and all this kinds of stuff just to keep them coming. And they love that atmosphere. So they love coming to the home. And so they did that till we got the prototype finished. We moved it to the hospital about a week before we actually went to the hospital to have our sixth child. So I'm in the hospital and with Kathy, my wife, during the contraction period, they come and go. I get this call from our head engineer, and he says, "Randy, the unit is down the hall from you. You need to go reset the button because there's a memory leak in the software. It's going to blow up if you don't go down there." I said, "Look, I'm trying to have a baby here, guys." I said, "Well, how long will it take?" She said, "Just takes a second. Just run down there and hit these Control Alt Delete and put it back. Then it'll run for another 24 hours." So I said to my wife, I said, "As soon as this contraction's over, I'm running down the hallway. I'm coming right back." So I did that, came back, we got successful, had Zachary, and then when we got home, or just as we got home, we received our first $1 million check from Sutter Hill Ventures, and that was enough money to move out of the house. So I went down and got the space, and when Zachary, 2 days later came home, we didn't have the engineers there, and so we named him Zachary, which means God has remembered. In other words, He's remembered to give our specs back to us. And I really think the engineers were a little bit, yeah, we needed to go to another space, but they love that kind of home feel, kids running around, food, but it just felt like real life to them. So it was a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Does Zachary know this story?
Oh, does Zachary know this story? Yeah, I keep
Uh,
telling him and says, "Dad, don't tell me that story again." I know, I know.
Well, I hope he's willing. I hope he's like gonna get back to you in some shape or form because you risked it all right there.
No, it was it's just there's a lot of exciting times and not so exciting times, but life's an adventure, whether it's 10 kids or starting a company or those great high moments and low moments. You kind of say life's an adventure and you keep going, and you hope the next adventure is in the process is good.
Yeah. I think what's important is that nowadays, the word entrepreneur is thrown in everyone's bio on Instagram and LinkedIn, and even though they don't really truly understand the definition of what an entrepreneur is, and I think that moment right there is a true definition of like, people are like, I want to be an entrepreneur. I could take my time off whenever I want. I could go on vacation whenever I want, and I think that moment right there is a true definition of like what an entrepreneur is. It's like at all times you need to be available and ready to go. It doesn't even matter if you're giving birth. You got to be ready to go if you want to be successful. And obviously, you've been able to be a successful entrepreneur. So I think that story I hope resonates with some people in understanding what an entrepreneur truly
Yeah.
means.
Yeah. Yeah. No, those were intense days, still are a lot of intensity, but they're fun, right? That's
Yes.
hopefully you can combine those two together to create that fun roadmap.
Yes. You came up with the name autonomous pharmacy, and when you came up with it, like the word autonomous probably wasn't like as
Mm,
favorable as it might
that's
be
true.
today. And and when you came up with it, you were scared to talk to customers about it because you thought that autonomous pharmacy mean like their jobs are going to be taken away. And I think there is still some of that fear
Sure.
in some people's back mind. For me, I think I'm the total opposite. I think autonomous pharmacy is the reason why pharmacists specifically will have more time to one expand their roles and be more involved in the front lines as they should be.
Yeah.
Do you still see pushback and people's thought process still having that fear, or where do we stand right now with that word autonomous pharmacy?
Well, it's interesting when I introduced the term autonomous pharmacy, the AI revolution had not happened. So a lot of people said, "Well, what do you mean, Randy, autonomous pharmacy?" And I think they were mostly thinking robots to deliver the drugs, right? So that means I'll have the delivery part done. But it didn't really mean that. It really meant how do we do all the things necessary to run a pharmacy and get drugs to patients without having pharmacists doing the logistical and thinking process that's not part of the clinical process. Let's let clinicians be clinical and let's let tactical stuff be done by systems and robots and systems. But then as AI came along, suddenly pharmacists are thinking, when I say autonomous pharmacy, you want to get rid of my job. And I said, heavens, no. I mean, you take, what do they say? That the pharmacist is the most trusted American and,
Most accessible, yeah.
yeah, everywhere, right? Yeah, most
Yep.
trusted healthcare partner everywhere. So if that is true, what a powerful influencer you have if a pharmacist actually came around to the counter and said, look, you're on these 5 meds. If you really want to get well, this is how it's going to have to work. And if you follow these things, you will get better. Stick to it, right? And that has tremendous impact on behavior modification of people who frankly are just kind of sometimes you just get stuck on the healthcare system, go get these meds, go do this, follow through on this. And it just feels almost lifeless. It's just like you're not really connected into what's going on. And the pharmacist has a better opportunity, I think, almost than anyone else in this clinical roadmap to make that impact. Because everybody is taking meds in this journey of healing, right? It's a piece of the puzzle that has to be done right.
So, a hot topic that comes up in my podcast recently is
Yeah.
um, so healthcare is an open field right now. Like everyone's running towards it. Even you don't even have to be in healthcare for you to try to have a piece of the pie because it's an
Yeah.
open field where like all these creative ideas are open to being received, and everyone has something to present to wherever is Silicon Valley, to these investors, to new companies, to maybe even I'm sure you've had people come pitch ideas to you
Yeah,
to implement things
absolutely.
into Omnicell. So my question to you is the conversation that comes up in these podcasts is do you see value in these companies having healthcare professional background CEOs, founders versus people that have a business background?
Yeah.
Because when you're starting a new company from start and you don't have a healthcare background, you might not see the vision if you've worked the front lines. You might
Yeah.
not know what to implement on the front lines. On the other hand, I could understand why someone would fight or argue the other side because a lot of healthcare professionals don't have the business mind,
Yeah.
and a lot of the business people don't have the healthcare mind. So I guess my question is like, do you see a value in either or? Do you see one being more received than other? Because we don't really see that many healthcare professionals jumping into the CEO founder roles.
Yeah.
Why do you think there's like a pushback or like not as many healthcare providers going into them? Because I personally think we need more healthcare professionals to go into these roles in order for us to see progression in innovation within healthcare.
Yeah. Well, I think when you're just embedded in healthcare, you really, let's just take the healthcare discipline. It's conservative by nature. In other words, introducing change into healthcare is introducing risk. So if you want an outcome, you follow the process and you don't change it, right? And so, or you even listen to, doctors, first do no harm, right? That's our oath. That's what we've got to make sure we do as we practice healthcare. So everything you're taught and you see in healthcare, you built that into your thinking. And so, the idea of going out and changing things, you feel like, oh my gosh, I have to go against all of these policies, procedures, rules, and sometimes laws in order to get something changed and convince colleagues and people that they should change. And so I think that's a little daunting. And so, but I think I wasn't in a healthcare professional when I jumped in, but it allows you to ask what I call the dumb questions. Well, why do you do it this way? How long have you been doing it this way? And so you're not threatening as much in a way that comes in and just, you're just collecting information and you're helping them think, and they're helping you think through that. right? And and when we tried to start Omnicell, by the way, we had, I don't know, 5, 6 different types of prototypes. It would bring nurses in and pharmacists and people in, and they were cut right from what I would say traditional business processes, and they'd look at that and they go, that would never work. And I said, well, why? That's standard, and they'd go through it, and we go, they're totally right. So we had to keep iterating until we got to something where I still remember we had 10 nurses come over from Stanford, and they looked at it, said, well, this is easy, doesn't take much to understand, and that's all I care about. And then when we heard that 10 times, we go, this is the one that's going to work. So you have to be really diligent and to keep going until you find that thing that works for everybody. You can't have it make certain groups happy and other groups not. It's just, there's so many constituents in the picture. And so that is the complexity of healthcare. And I think people that jump in from non-healthcare world think that, gee, if I throw this out there, this is going to save lots of money. People are just going to run out and buy it. It's a delicate issue.
How do you deal with competition? Because in healthcare, so I work in a health system setting,
Yeah,
and when you talk to a clinician and talk to them when they want to apply for a new job, there's like depending on if it's a pharmacist or a physician, there's two questions usually they always talk
yeah,
about is what EHR are you using, which
yeah.
is like are you using Epic or are you using
It's
Cerner,
Turner, right?
and then there's the automated dispensing machines that are there. And there's only two that I can think of. Omnicell is one of them.
Yeah,
So I always see competition as a good thing. I think competition is what keeps you on your toes, keeps you to advance, keeps you going. I don't see competition as a bad thing. How
no.
did you view competition at the beginning stages of the career when you first started Omnicell? What was your viewpoint? Were you looking at your competition for motivation, for how to make it better? How were you viewing your competition?
Yeah, I think it's very important, right? And I think you have to we had one main competitor, and so it's really important for us to say why are we different. And so you've got to take what maybe are some of their greatest strengths, and do the reverse to counter those, right? And say, well, those are great strengths, but they create some weaknesses and opportunities. So how can we do the antithesis of that to show that you're the counter of that? And so we had to work really hard. Healthcare is just a hard place to break into. And so you've got to be super focused on taking the long term. Now we did pretty well. I can still quote the first 5 years of our sales were 2, 4, 11, 24, and 48. And so that's a pretty good ramp. But most of those sales were not just adding new customers who've never had product, but taking customers away from our competitor. And so you have to build that DNA into your system. So in healthcare or even generally a lot of markets, there are only 3 competitors. There's the two competitors have 40% of the market, and then there's 120. And so early days, we had gotten up to about 17% market share. And I was reading this book. I think it was about Apple and how they had to get to 20% market share or they weren't going to survive. And I said, well, we've got to get to 20%. Remember, we're like 3 to 5% short of that. So we set this whole plan in motion on the innovation that we had. We wanted to make sure we went to 10 customers, 10 competitors and said, what are the 10 things you don't like about the system? And we said, okay, we're going to innovate on 3 of those so that we can walk in and say, hey, we know you at this shop probably don't like these things, but we fix these things for you. And so you've got to drive with innovation and you've got to drive with a business model that's different than your competitor. And then people will listen to you because if you say you're the same or even though you're slightly better than your competitor, no one wants to go through the pain of change. You've got to be big enough to make that change.
How do you block out all the noise? Because when you come into a new a new field, like I'm sure there's people in your
Yeah.
ears left and right. And when you have a board, how like your board, everyone on the board has an opinion. It's like,
Yeah.
how do you block out all the noise and be like, take it all in and then make that decision?
Yeah, I think you've gotta, you gotta separate the few decisions that are really gonna allow you to win, and then what is sort of the lower level things that, well, we could go either way on that. It's probably not gonna make any difference. And so it's not just deciding what the decision is, it's deciding what is ultra important that you are not gonna give into no matter what. This is our ethos, this is who we are, this is how we win, and this is our future. So if you're going to say that the main core of our company is innovation, and we're going to innovate better than anybody else, well, you've got to prove it to yourself that you're innovating better than anybody else. You got to hire the right people, you got to demand the right focus, and and you've got to try a lot of things that, including things that may not work. Uh, uh, because you're not innovating enough if everything works right out of the bat. So, um, you got to, and when you got that next incremental dollar, you got to say, hey, we're going to put that in innovation because we know that's how we're going to win over the long term.
I love how you just said that, like, not everything that you do is going to work because there's been some machines and robots that did not work
Yeah,
out for Omnicell, like the robotic carts that could wheel themselves around hospitals.
yeah,
There was a story of them just falling down the stairs and
yeah.
of the hospitals, or the M5000, which was a machine
Oof.
designed to package up to 40 prescriptions an hour. In the day and age of where creativity ideas are coming up left and right. We've kind of touched on it a little bit. How do you choose what the next innovation is that you're going to focus on?
Well, I tell you, we have a lot of great ideas out there, and so what we wanted to do was have an open funnel, I would say, for ideas from customers, employees, even outside people, that flow into a bucket of ideas. And then we adjudicate these ideas. We look at them, we try to test, the sensitivity going back and forth to customers and so forth. And then we usually pick 15 of these ideas a year. And then we run them through at what's called an innovation center. And an innovation center takes this 15 and they have a 12-week sprint. So in that 12-week sprint, they go out and do some early investigation with some customers. They create prototypes on 3D printers. They mock up the software. They do the calculations for savings or safety or understanding where this fits in. But they have to do it in 12 weeks. So these people are kind of like in the startup mode. They're kind of like in my kitchen, or working on the table. Like, okay, guys, we gotta drive through this. And in fact, before we opened up the center in Austin, Texas, we were kind of stuck because they couldn't get all the, I don't know, all the stuff through the city. And so people were actually innovating on their kitchen counter like the old days. And so one of those innovations ended up being great. And so we funded it and we're about to release it. And it's just, and that's how you do it, because an idea sounds great, but you have to get it far enough down the line so that people can see it and understand it. And it's just fascinating. The thing that I've come to find out, if there's a little piece of hardware involved, you've got to show them what that thing looks like. I don't care if it's a box or has three lights on it or it's fancy and space age. A lot of people want to touch and feel it, and then they can understand how it fits and works inside their operation and whether it's going to work or not. And until you do that, it's just too ethereal. It's just too conceptual that people just can't jump in and go for it. You don't get the right information.
Being in an industry of technology, do you look towards anyone for motivation? Is there like who is, I guess, the mentor of yours where you look up to that to
Oh,
get some motivation from?
yeah. Well, one thing I do, and I ask all my team members to do, is we ask people to get, each of us has a, I don't know, executive coach. And it's just we want to personally improve ourselves, right? And so if you never want to believe that you're that great, because if you do, you're not you're going to screw up, or you're going to say, "Oh, I thought of a great idea. It must be great." And so I think by getting these coaches, they keep the balance of the perspective of what you're doing and how you work and what you're working on. And I just love the fact, I know a little cliche, but I love Steve Jobs for his tenacity to not give up on on doing something that just was hard, right? And I say to my engineers, I said, if we come up with some stuff and it's hard to do, it means nobody else is going to do it. We have this IV compounding robot, and it's the hardest thing on the planet because it's an FDA. It's got to be precise. Got to deal with all of these vials and compounding of fluids. It's going into patients. It's got to work perfectly every time. And so we've been investing in that over 5 years, and now we're rolling it out, and it's just amazing results. But it was not easy, and I love the fact that Steve Jobs, he was a tyrant, not because he was just didn't like people sometimes. It's because he was a perfectionist, and perfectionist meant that they were going to win.
You know,
And
it's
so
it's it's funny because when you said like, "Oh, it's might feel cliche." I said this in another podcast. I said whenever someone says, "Oh, it might be cliche," and they say a statement or a person, refer to a statement
yeah,
or a phrase or a person, those are the people, the cliche people are the
yeah,
people that you need to study the most because it might sound cliche, but like there might be a reason. There's something why everyone keeps referring to them. So instead of like just thinking like I don't see it as cliche. I see it as like, no, we need to study those people even more and learn
I
from
think
them
so. I think
because
so.
the cliche people are the people that are doing something that's making an impact. So it's like we need to study them and learn from them more.
Yeah, and people forget about this. I actually do a little introductory talk to new employees. I said, when Apple was coming up with the first touchscreen iPhone, they were competing against the BlackBerry, which was all thumbs, you know, and I'm sure BlackBerry went in there and said, "Okay, guys, let's do a lab test. How easy is it to write an email on this versus my?" I mean, this iPhone isn't going to make it. It's just a joke. And but what did Apple do or the industry do is they created apps. Apps mean you don't have to type very much. You know? And then BlackBerry sat around and said, "Apps, who needs those?" And they didn't get around to apps till it was too late, and it just killed the business. So I just think it's 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 amazing what that one moment in time was like, right? I mean, I don't know, I had Blackberries. My thumbs would get sore, flying around, and if you had the old the old Blackberries, they would work on the plane. You
Yeah, yeah.
cross the Colorado Mountains.
Typewriter.
Oh, where level? Like, let me get this.
It's crazy that you said that because the same way when the new iPhone was presented with the keypad and everything, and everyone was so resistant, and there was I don't know if you know who Gary Vaynerchuk is. He made a comment on saying, when the tractors first came out, all the farmers were scared that their jobs are going to be lost because the
Yeah,
tractor was going to come and take over their jobs. And when I hear these things, I'm like, man, healthcare needs to hear these things because that's what's happening now. Like
yeah,
with AI, innovation, technology, all these buzzwords, everyone's looking at it and they're like, oh my God, my job is going to be lost. But no, the tractor made the farmer's job easier to be able to
totally.
build bigger farms or work on bigger more farms. The iPhone is a computer in your hands. Like we literally, I'm having this conversation with you on my laptop, but I could have it on my phone if I wanted to. Like
Exactly.
it wouldn't be impossible. So it's like healthcare needs to understand that every time something new is presented, it's gonna be a little like there's gonna be a little roadblock, but man, going past that roadblock, you're gonna look back and be like, "Man, why were we doing it like that?"
Yeah, totally. Totally.
Um,
Well, it's scary, right? That's the problem, right? The unknown future is scary. But things adjust, right? Things
yeah,
adjust,
I think
and
it's
people
because there's
adjust.
people's lives involved. That might be why it's a little more resistant,
Yeah,
healthcare, but which is understandable.
sure.
Um, Going public, when you start a company, everyone, I don't know if everyone dreams of going public,
Yeah.
but there is definitely some people that dream of going public for sure. And Omnicell went public, and I'm sure it was an exciting time for you. But I'm sure it presented also with a lot of challenges. What were some unexpected challenges that came across your table once you went public that you didn't expect? Like people always think about like the exciting parts of going public, but they never think that I'm sure there's stuff that we don't know about or think about.
Yeah.
What were those things that came across your table?
Well, I think you're right. You look at that going public moment. It's a funding event, right? It's when you're going to get probably the highest value for your shares, and you're going to get cash in the bank. And I used to just feel like I'd have to just go around and raise funds for a year's worth of cash burn, and then 6 months later, I'd start that journey again. And I did that for a lot of years, and then finally, we were ready to go public. Actually, it took us 3 times, and we went public right at the end of the dot-com bust. And it was really strange. And the reason we got out is because we weren't a dot com company. And they said, well, you got real revenues and you got real customers, and well, yeah, you guys can go public. So we did that, and we got the money and we put it in the bank. And it was really great because I didn't have to go out, quote unquote, raise money anymore. But the people who buy your stock, because it is the market, people can get in and out. You have to continually kind of go out and meet with not only your shareholders but new potential shareholders, because as the stock goes up and down, some shareholders decide to get out, others want to get in, and you've got to have those people who aren't in the stock when there's a dip that say, hey, I want to get in the stock when an opportunity comes. You have to get them ready. And so you just have to have this mindset that you've got to constantly go out, or you have your IR team go out now and look and spot those shareholders who'd be interested in your story and get them ready. And now they do their homework and so forth, but you go and they want to meet the CEO before they make an investment. Most of our managed money shareholders would, but you meet with them, and then a couple of days later they make a $50 million order. It's just like you know and I thought, it took me about 5 years to get $50 million in the company. Now it's 24 hours or 24 minutes. It's pretty crazy. So, I think that's one of the key learnings, is that as the company moves through the market or its phases of growth and stuff, that there are different kinds of shareholders that want to hold you or don't want to hold you, and you've got to be ready for that.
Has it been hard to make decisions on what your next move is without thinking about that side, without thinking about the stock, without thinking about how it's going to impact the stock, and just solely
Yeah,
thinking about the future? Because as we spoke, like you might come up with the best innovation possible tomorrow, right? And it could
yeah,
have the biggest resistance, but in 20, 30 years, you're going to be like, oh my God, Omnicell was so ahead of the game. But
yeah.
today, it might tank your stock because they don't just see the vision. Has it been hard for you to
I
try
think
to see it that
so.
way?
I mean, you make up a really good point, because the stock market, they think in terms of, there's some people that think in 90 days. These are more like hedge funds, but most of our shareholders are longer term than that. But they really want to understand on an annual basis or next year where you're going to be and what that story looks like. But a lot of the innovation you're investing isn't going to come out next year or even this year. And so you've got to be able to put together, a roadmap that kind of has different milestones along the way that show that you're going to get to this ultimate story. In our case, it's the autonomous pharmacy. And so, if some of those points in the roadmap are too hard to understand, or it's not concrete enough or driving enough earnings, it can disappoint shareholders. So you've got to stick to your story. And I think that that's important. That's one of the hard things that I've learned, that don't look at the stock price, stick to your story, go for the long-term win. And maybe it'll be a rough year. Okay, but it's only a year. It's not the end of the world. It's a year. It's the reset year. This is where we're going to invest. This is why it's a good time to invest us, because here's where we're going in the next couple of years. So um, I think at first, when we were public, what you said was probably more true of me. I'd be going like, oh my God, if we say that, this could happen or that could happen. But as I've matured and been a long time, or a really long time, public CEO, you really be able to walk in and connect with the shareholders and say, look, if you're looking for a stock that's just going to, go straight up and never go down, there's no such thing, number one. But number two, steadily over time, we're going to be an investment, and here's why. And actually, some people like that, right?
Yeah, for sure. What's something you said you've been a CEO for a long time, actually 30 plus years. I don't want to
Yeah,
age you. I don't want to
yeah,
age you, but
you are aging. I was like 12 when I started.
it's something to definitely be proud of. I have something I would like to ask you later on, but
Yeah,
what's the single most important lesson you've taught both your kids, plural kids,
yeah,
and and
and many plural.
and yes, and your employees about success? I mean, success is such a I think it's kind of gone to a point where it's like subjective at this point. Like everyone
Yeah.
has their own definition of success. So, what is someone with a lot of experience as successful as you've been? What's the single most important lesson you tell your kids and employees about success?
Yeah, I think that, and I want to be careful how to say this, but see, first of all, don't focus on the money. I said, for instance, if I'm advising one of my kids that's going out to get a job, what you want to do is get a job with somebody who knows a lot about a career or an industry that you can learn from. Don't worry about your title. Don't worry about the money. You're going to have a better career if you're in a position to learn. That is really key. And I'd say that if you really work hard at the things that are purposeful in life, like we're not just in this to make sell systems and make money, but we're in there trying to change people's life, then the money comes as a byproduct of that, not as the focus. Right now, you've got to invest in things, yes, that make money or are going to work, but it's not all about extracting the highest value. The other thing that I love about Omnicell, I love about healthcare. These are long-term relationships. You take chief pharmacy officers who are the people we interact with the most. They don't go to get other jobs that are not chief pharmacy officers. They stay in that sort of realm. And so if you think you're going to kind of go burn the bridge with one of them, or kind of put a deal to make you a lot of money and not work for them, you've got to have win-win in life. It has to work for them and it has to work for you, and they're going to be there forever. So they're going to know you. You've got to be able to walk down the hallway of a convention center and not ever be in a position not to look somebody in the eye, even if you did something wrong, then own up for it, or if you didn't do it right, but never break the relationship based on a business ideal that was to extract money from them, but nothing else. Right?
I have a uh, interesting question. So I'll give you a little background before I ask it. So
Yeah.
pharmacy right now is in a big transition phase. Of our pharmacist role is expanding, and there's I don't know if you're familiar with collaborative practice agreements. These are agreements that are made between pharmacists and physicians for them to be able to work together in a collaborative way. For example, if a physician has a private office, a pharmacist can work with the physician to manage the patient together, giving the pharmacist freedom to maybe adjust medication dosages, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of giving them the freedom to practice at top of their license.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, right now there's a big it's challenging for pharmacists to approach physicians to work in this collaborative way because physicians see it as you're coming over and stepping on our shoes, or you're trying to be physicians, or you're trying to do more than what you should be doing.
Yeah.
My question to you is that from the business perspective, I'm sure
Yeah.
there's things that you have dealt with in the business world that have the same connotation, same pushback. Maybe you wanted to approach someone or get into business with someone, or even present Omnicell to someone that
Yeah.
they were like, I don't know. You're like, I don't believe in the vision. I don't think this is gonna work for us. I think you're gonna implement this and take away jobs, or whatever their pushback was in the beginning. If you could give some advice on pharmacists, because I think what pharmacists need to learn is that business communication, leadership communication, in order to be able to be successful in these conversations with physicians. I
Right.
think maybe their approach might be I don't know, like maybe I don't know what the word I don't know what the word is. Yeah, it's just like I think the business mind is very important in this because you're
Yeah.
selling yourself. You're selling. It's
Yeah.
sales. What
Yeah.
advice would you have for pharmacists from a business perspective on how to approach these conversations for someone that's getting so much pushback?
Well, I tell you, we have to remind ourselves at Omnicell the same concept. You need to approach, in this case, the pharmacist, the physician, not what are you going to do for them, but what problem are you going to solve for them?
Yeah.
And if you talk about the activities in terms of solving their problem and understanding what that is, then it's easy to let go of the problems that the physician has and turn it over to somebody else. But if you describe it in terms of, hey, I'm a pharmacist and these things I can do, that that's not really, that doesn't feel collaborative. It's just activity. And so, and you have to be able to ask. I think to engage in a good relationship with anybody new or even old, you've got to ask the questions. You got to start with the questions. How are things running? What's your number one efficiency problem? What's your number one regulatory problem? What's your number one time problem? What's your number one system problem that you struggle with? And you can ask those four questions, and you will get a boatload of information about really what their life is like. And then from that, you can formulate a solution set that makes sense. And so I think before you walk in there, you have to do your homework. And I think part of that homework is really constantly focusing on those problems. But then when you're looking at a particular group to go talk to, type of physician, practice they have, try to adjust your problem solving to that practice by knowing that practices that are like this are going to have these kinds of problems. So, and it's not like you want to study hard, but you don't want to come in and say, "Hey, I've got the solution." You want to come in and say, "Hey, I want to listen to your problems. Tell me about them." And what I find too is what's really interesting about that is you could go into a hospital same size as the one you just left and say, "Describe your problems," and you think, "Well, I'll hear the same things over here," and you hear something totally different. And so you would have a different response to that group than you would have to this other group. So you can't just kind of throw everything into a bucket. Uh, and so that's my number one thing is be a better listener than a presenter. Uh, and you'll find that most people want to tell you their problems, right?
Yeah.
Which
No,
is
I
that's
think
good.
I think that's a great
Yeah,
advice. I think
yeah,
that's something that probably a lot of pharmacists would have not thought of doing. I think they would have thought the other way. So
yeah,
thank you so much for that. I think a lot of people will
yeah,
gain value from that.
absolutely.
What have you learned from the early days of implementing a new tech in healthcare that you're taking with you and implementing the next era of healthcare? Because I
Huh.
mean, it's been a common conversation, obviously, that how it's hard to implement in things. But what were because I feel like you're back where you started, kind of in a way. Like,
Totally. Totally.
You were implementing something brand new. You got so much pushback, and then now the world. I feel like you're back to square one. Just a lot more wiser, a lot more younger nowadays than in the past. So what did you learn from there that you're taking
Oh,
with you to implement?
I love this is a very insightful question. I'll give you a 10, 10 out of 10 for asking this question because you can't get comfortable what you've done and what's gotten you here isn't going to get you there today anymore. And so you've got to go obviously figure out those new problems. But one of the things that is just paramount in the next generation of tech, and you see it's in other places, is the simplification of the implementation of the software. We call it cognitive burden. So if you're
Hmm.
interfacing with a system, can you just sort of interface with it without making a mistake because it's just not going to let you?
Hmm.
Or is it you got to think, okay, now I got to get this thing out of the system. I got to pick this drug. And now, what was the name of that? There are
Yeah.
different ways to approach it. But that particularly, what's really high on my list right now is how can you just automate the simplest approach for new versions of software, the adoption of new tech without having to pull thousands of people offline and train them, right? And so we just have to come up with systems that don't require this huge overhead. And now that you've seen these big in the US, we've got these massive providers now, right? And so when you say, "Oh, gee, you're on the old version of software, we're going to have to upgrade your servers and all your units," it's just like, oh, it's just like a ton of bricks. And you want these people to move to the new software because it's more cyber secure, has more features. Your help desk can help them, and but the pain of that upgrade is just got to go away. And so you as you move to the cloud and some of these new tech, there's just these small upgrades that happen every month, and no one has to do anything. It just happens. And so those are the two things that we're working on: is how do you assimilate more technology with minimal effort, and then how do as you use the technology, how do you remove the cognitive burden? And so as people were telling me that and we're focusing on that, I said, well, show me the new, latest and greatest stuff we're working on. I don't know. I said, I know how the system works back and forth. Show me how that's actually going to work. Cause I was kind of a disbeliever in this and not a disbeliever, but a nurse who pounds on the system is the second most used system in the hospital. So they know what buttons to push. They know how fast to go. But boy, some of these things, these small little radio circles they put up that kind of show where you are in the process so that if someone calls out to you, you turn around, you know exactly where you are. And I thought, well, God, that's genius. And it's just a little green light, little thing that's going down the side of the page. And they've taken, we used to have some of these screens would have, 12 buttons you could push on. Now can you make every screen so the maximum choices are three, right? And there's just a lot of things you can do with the tech, and so one of the things we have more. We used to have like one UI, yeah, user interface person that made all your screens look this. And now we got 20 of these people because this stuff if you do it right, it really makes a difference. And that's the problem: is how are we going to get tech adopted in healthcare if it's not easy to adopt? It's just not going to get adopted. So that's the frontier that we're facing.
Do you foresee yourself going when I go like on your website, you see the words medication management or solving medication errors, and first thing that I think of, maybe because I'm so deep into this in the world now of
Yeah,
like this innovation, is digital health. And I
yeah,
look at your company, I'm like, man, I could definitely see you guys entering that digital health world, maybe creating an app to be the leader in digital health. Have you guys ever thought of it that world, or are you trying to just stick to what you know best, which
Well,
is
we're
those?
we're pretty close to adjacent to medication management, so usually that's somewhere in the picture. One of the key tenets of medication management is, or of the autonomous pharmacy is, and this was the industry helped define this roadmap for us, is that 100% of the medications or meds that are in the supply chain or people's homes or in the hospitals are visible. And so, how are you going to manage the meds if you can't see them? Or how are you going to digitize them if you can't see them? And so what happens is when you digitize the reality of where that physical med is, then the possibilities of the things that you could do are just incredible. And yeah, you seep into, you know, this patient is predicted not to be able to take their insulin. They're going to have an insulin issue. We need to put somebody on it and we need to make these changes. Otherwise, their health is going to go down the drain. These four people, we never need to touch. They always do it right. They always seem to have the right numbers. And so, how do you put your resources where they're going to have the most impact? And so, there's just so many insights from medication and what the real outcomes are and what the patient behaviors are that drive those outcomes is important. And if we could just get people to get the meds and take the meds, I mean, it sounds those two things sound simple, but they're incredibly hard. And and so we've got to figure that out. The other thing I say, and this is so important in understanding medication management and outcomes of medication today, is that I think in 2025, over 50% of the drugs are specialty meds. These are very expensive drugs. And so if that's how we're going to allocate these resources, my gosh, we've got to use them right. And they have to drive the outcomes that you know, they're supposed to drive. Otherwise, we shouldn't be spending this huge resources on these things. And so the risk, if you're going to manage the risk, if you will, of these outcomes, there's such a high beta in the medication piece to get right in order to reduce the risk. And I just think that uh, we're still struggling with patients kind of walking out of the doc office with the med and not really understanding how it's going to work or how important it is to take, or I'll go get it next week, or what's behind that med and why it's important, and how do you get into the regiment and discipline of taking it?
And I
And
think that's where the pharmacist role comes in into the CPAs I mentioned earlier, the collaborative practice agreements that physicians and pharmacists can have together in order to work together, and also in combination with digital health. I think I wrote something on LinkedIn a couple months ago and said there's going to be a time in the future where when you go to your doctor's office and you're not going to be prescribed a medication, you're going to be prescribed an app,
yeah,
and that app is going to be your prescription, and that app is going to be managed by pharmacists. Yesterday, I wrote on LinkedIn about remote patient monitoring, and
yeah,
how pharmacists are going to be the leaders in remote patient monitoring in the future, and being able to manage the wearables and the apps and all these data. And pharmacists are going to be the leaders in that. And I think you guys, for sure, as a company, can be the leaders in the remote patient monitoring sector, because you're already in the field, and I think you could definitely dabble into that area.
yeah. I think we definitely could. Certainly is, where we see a lot of these critical patients, and the meds are the key, right? And I just think it's high time for pharmacists to have more billable services, right? I mean, the education, the practicums, the practicality of you just being there and being able to help manage a patient's health, and releasing, what is it, 200, 300,000 people onto the population, at least in the United States, is 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 an answer to the shortage of doctors and all the issues that we have in healthcare. To me, it's just pure genius, and it shouldn't be that hard to decide. But I think we're making some progress there, and hopefully we'll make a lot more because I mean, I just think such highly educated, intelligent people in the medication field need to be doing more medical services, if you will, that are billable for their time.
It's funny you say that because I think one of the issues is in pharmacy is that, especially on LinkedIn, you see a lot of pharmacists, healthcare professionals in general, complaining a lot, right? But most people in healthcare talk about change, but actually like do something about it. It's
Yeah.
really easy for you to sit behind a computer and type your complaints about how crappy the community pharmacy is, how, oh, I'm overloaded, blah, 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 all this stuff, but it's another thing for you to actually do something about it. What separates the ones who make an impact, like yourself, from the ones who just complain and complain on
Yeah.
social media?
Well, I think you've gotta get active in other groups. If you have an idea, you've got to pull in your associates, you gotta pull in, the people that are just geographically around you. I One of my early days, I used to fly in to a geographic area, and we would, we'd call all the heads of the pharmacy, whether they're our customers or not, and say, "Look, we're gonna sit down and discuss problems in pharmacy and healthcare," and we bring in a speaker, and they'd talk to, and we'd bring about 10 or 12 people, and then the night of the reception was the day before we did the seminar. I would thought all these people would know who each other, they'd get together with these guys, they know each other, and I just think there's a tendency for people not to just get out of their office or get out of their basement or out of the counter to come and meet other people that are in the industry to just talk about and share some of these things. So it ended up being a very cathartic thing. I'm assuming people get together and talk, and I think, and that is somewhat of my impression has been that many pharmacists are a little more introverted. They're scientists, so they want to study what's in front of them and look at those things. They probably love just staying on the computer, but you have to get out and talk to people, and go to the ASHP, go to these organizations that bring people together, and then join in on one of these committees, either state or national committees, and that'll change your life because you'll be involved with people everywhere else. They'll look at the problem different, and then you could perhaps, advance the industry that way because it's got to be advanced sort of in a group fashion, right? And so I've been very involved in ASHP and some other things, and I've just been very impressed how they are continually trying to change the view of what a pharmacist is doing today versus in the future and getting them ready for that.
You know what's interesting? As fast as companies are coming in, I feel like they're leaving. And it could be the greatest innovation in the world. I'm not sure if you heard about Forward. Forward came in, they raised millions of dollars, and they just went bankrupt. 23andMe just announced for
Yeah.
bankruptcy, and they were like such a great innovative company, doing PGX, doing all these things, but they fall for bankruptcy. Obviously, we don't know the backstories of why these people are going bankrupt. I'm sure there's many reasons, but they're great innovations that are not working out for some reason. Most people never even get their ideas off the ground, right? What's the real reason most entrepreneurs, I don't want to use the word fail, because I don't think it's a failure, but most entrepreneurs have a setback, especially in healthcare.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. Well, there's two or three things that strike me. One is that in entrepreneurship and in ideation, you've got to fail fast. They say, well, you fail fast. And generally, you hang on to some ideas too long. And so you've got to recognize, you got to know when to call it. M5000, you mentioned that product that we just thought was going to change the world. It was one of the most great expert computers. It was just fun to watch the thing work, and then finally we had to call it. This thing was it just wasn't perfect enough to work, and it was just going to be a maintenance nightmare. So you got to call those things. So, but you've got to fail fast. You can't hang on to that thing forever. Um, and then secondly, if you're going to fail, failing is fine. It's just got to keep moving. So you got to have enough capital, right? If you're stuck on one idea, you've got to have enough capital to usually have two in the hopper, and so one. And what I found is that the one I thought was going to be big didn't go big, but the one that I had sort of in the second seat took off. So you've got to have sort of a multi approach, and then you got to. Then I think you've got to, you know, you got to think about uh, how am I going to take this and evolve it to the next thing. You've got to take two or three steps, and healthcare doesn't always. They're still on the old concept while you're starting to produce the second one. And you've got to realize you got to feed the first one because no one's going to switch overnight to the next one, right? So you're kind of stuck in these, I don't know, sustaining, which is not, it's not really a good thing. People said, well, I just bought this. You can't be sustaining. You got to keep innovating in the old platform and while you launch the new one. So you got to keep engineering and marketing and go to markets, feeding both of those lines and then do the careful transition, right? And so a big part of being successful in innovating in healthcare is understanding those transitions. And then the hardest thing, I think the hardest thing in healthcare innovation is the adoption phase. You can get 5 or 10 hospitals to buy something. And I used to actually say, I think we can get 10 hospitals to buy anything from us. And you'll say, well, we got 10 people to buy it. It must be successful, right? But that doesn't determine success. The adoption phase is very confusing. You get some early adopters that'll buy anything. Then you got this long chasm where nobody's buying anything because the only people buying it were the early adopters. But then finally you mature the product and you get a few things right in it, and then it starts taking off. And so I think when you're innovating and launching products, you got to figure out, is this just the early adoption phase and it's going to take off when we mature? We're going to find the two or three things to mature it? Or is this really a product that, well, we got some people to buy it, but it's probably not going to go, right? And so it's that adoption phase, it's having enough capital, it's failing fast, and, and trying to win on something that's easy enough to adopt, but that's always tough.
So I'm sure you've seen the movie Wolf of Wall Street and the infamous, sell me a pen. Do you have a go-to when you're sitting down? Like, we've obviously mentioned multiple times, it's very hard to sell to hospitals or pharmacies and have them change the way they've been doing things for decades. Do you have a secret weapon in your back pocket that you go in with that you're like, oh man, this meeting is not going as well as I thought it was going to be. Let me hit them with my secret weapon.
Well, I think
I don't want you to give away your secret, so I can
no,
understand
I'm
if you
not
don't want
really
to
careful there.
answer.
No, I think for me is showing that I'm personally invested in the long term and that we don't have everything right, but we want to get it right, right? So what I might be selling to you today or we have today may not be perfect, but that's not the end of the road. That's not the end of the story. And so, I'm going to take your feedback, and then I'm going to come. And if you will, I want your feedback, and I'm going to come back in 90 days and present something else, and see if this is more in line with what you're thinking and what we can do, that we can commit to do. But if we can't commit to do it, I don't want an unhappy customer, and I know you're going to be around a long time, and I'm going to be around a long time, so I don't want to do that. But if it makes sense when I come back in 90 days, then let's talk about it. But if I can't make sense out of it, I'm not gonna. So it's almost like you're not selling. It's almost like you garner the relationship more important than making this one sale.
Yeah. Two more questions for you. You talked
Yeah.
about being in the game for a long time. Obviously, we dabbled a little bit about 30 plus years. The average CEO tenure in America is 7 years. You've been CEO of Omnicell for 33 years, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. If you were to pass the baton to your son, what would that conversation look like?
Wow, that's a good question. I think to my son or anyone else is uh, you need to understand the ethos of Omnicell and the people who have purpose in their hearts and live up to the purpose and live up to what you say you're going to do for the customers and don't compromise. And then the business will take care of itself. But you've got to be authentic. You got to admit your problems. You've got to be. You've got to think. And I said, this is. It sounds obvious. Maybe this is his, but think long term. How do you win over the long term? And winning isn't long term isn't 5 years. It's 10, 20, 30. So that when you stand up in 30 years, you could say, hey, not always perfect, but we lived up to what we committed to, and we were wrong. We admitted it, and we kept to our life of innovation for you, the customer, and the patient.
And so you said 30 years. It's been 33 years. I got to ask you the question. Can
Yeah,
you stand up and say that? You feel like you've been able to
I
do that?
think I can. I mean, I still recall um, right when we came out with the HIPAA laws, we had an unfortunate event where we only had 3 laptops in the whole company that were unencrypted to help work on very large customer sites, get the throughput on their servers. One of these engineers left their laptop in their car, got stolen. So it was a massive HIPAA event, and we had to go to 3 accounts. And so I went to those 3 accounts and said, this is our fault. We're going to pay for all the expenses. You can get your lawyers. I don't care. We don't need a lawyer. And I flew out the next day and met with each of the CEOs of those 3 hospitals personally. And even my lawyer said, you can't say that. It could be, I said, look, guys, I don't know what the expenses could be, but we got $100 million in our bank and it might be 50. If our reputation is not worth $50 million, then we should do it. And at the end of the day, it cost us a couple $1,000,000, but it was our fault. And they weren't happy when we were in there, but we went up and owned up to it. And we told them where we were, what we were doing about it, and what we're going to do different in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's big. I think I'm sure those hospitals are looking and respect you even more by doing that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Last question for you. I love asking this question. I ask this question to all my guests. If
Yeah.
I was to go back to college,
Sure.
undergrad, or even high school, speak to your best buddy, your favorite teacher, and ask who was Randy, what would they say?
Well, I'd say that Randy was probably a little bit of an introverted guy, not as extroverted as I look, but he was passionate about a few things, and I loved history and I loved some science and I loved some things, so I really got into those things, and so I love problem solving, and I think that I loved it so much that eventually I got out of myself. What broke through myself. I didn't belong to any fraternities. I didn't, I was, but I had this love for solving problems that really drove me to break through some of those things. So I think some of them would be a little surprised that I was running a company because I just didn't, I wasn't president of the class or anything like that. I was pretty normal, maybe unnormal, unnaturally not noticeable.
Well, the non noticeable people are usually the ones that do the biggest things. So it's at no surprise that you are where you are now. And you said leading a company. It's not any company, a billion-dollar company. So I think you've definitely surprised a lot of people looking back, and I'm sure. Yeah, if there was any people that weren't your friends or bullied you, they're gonna look back and regret those now. Um, Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me. I really enjoyed our conversation. I can't wait to see what Omnicell does for pharmacy, for healthcare, for the future. Maybe dabble into that digital health era. I think that
Yeah, I
I
think
can't
you're
wait to see
pushing me there,
that.
Neiman. I got to go check my innovation group and see where we are.
Hey, let me know. Let me know. I'll be open to bring up new ideas to Omnicell. I'm always
All
open
right.
to pitching. But I think you guys will do great. I think you have already done great. You've impacted the profession a lot. You've solved a big problem early on, and can't wait to see. I know this is just the beginning phase, and another, not the beginning phase, but the next beginning phase,
It
as we
is really the
spoke.
next beginning.
Next
I
beginning.
think
I
you're very
think
smart to say that. It is the next beginning,
I
right?
feel like the journey is started back from zero, and in a good way. In a good way,
Yeah.
started back from zero and ranking up to the next 30 years.
Thanks so
Um,
much.
of course. Any last words? I'm gonna leave it up to you for the audience.
Well, I think I would just say to all the listeners that healthcare's got a lot of problems, and we've got to have the big enough hearts to go solve them. And we do have to innovate our way because healthcare can't be as expensive as it is, and then the whole world needs healthcare, and they deserve it. And so it's on us to figure that out. And and it's just not innovation and tech that's going to do it. It's going to be innovation, tech, and the right minds and hearts to get it done. So let's keep our minds and hearts in the right places, which are those patients that are in those beds. And we know who those patients are. They were my daughter at one time. They're our parents. They're our friends. They're our loved ones. And
Yep.
so we got to do it for them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Randy, and thank you so much for everyone that was tuning in.
You bet.